Good morning. Today is June the 30th, the last Monday of June. Wow. How time flies. We just got them right. We just got them at the end of the month. And today we are talking about, as we had promised last week, we are promise keepers after all. We are talking about denominations. But I know that there are a lot of questions and concerns regarding what is happening in current events. A lot of people have actually contacted me and asked me, are you going to talk about Iran and Israel? What about this Mamdani figure? Are you going to talk about him? And so we will be discussing those two current events today as well. But our first content portion will be denominations that we have considered or we are considering. Is it past, present, future? What is it? Will consider.
Okay.
As a church. And we'll talk about those denominations this morning. You are listening to the Dear Church Podcast. Welcome to the Dear Church Podcast, where we exist to fill your ears and your minds with the study of God to see the world as disciples of Christ. My name is Sam Yang. We have with us Pastor Eugene and Chunsuk and Brian. And my voice is a little, as they say, hoarse today. Must be the weather, I think. Because it was very hot, and then it wasn't. And I think that really messes with my system, so... Today, as a review of what we've been talking about the past 2 weeks, I just wanted to just quickly go over why we're doing these episodes in the first place and the history of the Presbyterian Church. We did this so that we would understand where our church, polity comes from, where our ecclesiology comes from. We are rooted in the Reformed Presbyterian tradition, and we wanted to kind of give you a tour through world history, if you will, Christian history, to see where the roots of this tradition even comes from and why we believe that this is the most biblical type of form of church government. And so that's why we're doing this episode. But to just give you maybe some review, if you will, Presbyterianism is derived from presbytery, which is the form of church government that's ruled by presbyters, aka elders, within the session. I think we are going to talk about this later, but there are two different views on the office of eldership. There is a three-office view, which holds minister, elder, and deacon as the three distinct offices within the church. It's not interchangeable. This view is held by denominations like the OPC. Then there's a two-office view, which holds the elder and deacon as distinct offices. And in this view, the pastor and the ruling elder are both elders with simply different roles within the same office. And this view is held by denominations like the PCA. So that's just kind of a differentiation that we can just kind of get off the bat.
What about the ARP?
The ARP, they told me they're like 2.5. Yeah. But a simple view of Presbyterian polity is each Presbyterian church has a session that rules over the local congregation. A presbytery is an assembly of multiple local congregation sessions within a particular region. Then there are multiple presbyteries within a synod, or GA, General Assembly. And so a synod becomes the presbytery of a province, let's say. And then the GA is the presbytery of the country. So there are different differences. For example, the ARP does not have a general assembly. They have a synod, whereas the PCA has a general assembly and not a synod. And so there are different names and levels. They'll skip synod, or they'll go straight to general assembly, or they won't have a general assembly. They'll have a synod instead, if that makes sense. Am I speaking too fast?
Nope.
I just want to get to the meat, which I believe you will provide.
Will I?
I think so. So just kind of giving you some background, we talked about Acts 15, the Jerusalem Council, as the scriptural basis for, as an example for us to follow for church government. And quickly, just the history of the denominations in the U.S. This is how we get denominations. Within each Presbyterian denomination, we have the different levels of government, if you will. And so I think, I do want to talk about three distinct denominations that our church, our session has been considering, has been praying about and thinking about. But before we do that, is there anything that I missed or anything that you would like to add on to?
I don't even know where this is.
What do you mean?
This is not history.
No, this is just review time.
Yeah. We just talked about elders. It's not.
No, yeah.
Okay. You can move on. from
Okay.
there.
All right. So, moving on to different denominations, the three that our church has been prayerfully considering is the ARP, the PCA, and maybe even the OPC.
Maybe.
Maybe. And so I wanted to give a brief, I guess, background to these different denominations so that our church members have an idea of where these denominations even come from, the distinctions between the three, and I guess your thoughts, if that's okay, Pastor Eugene. So first we have the ARP, which is the Associate Reformed Presbytery. The background is in Scotland, 18th century. It was a merger between the Succession Church in 1733, formed by, if you know this name, Ebenezer Erskine. I'm sure he's a popular figure amongst our young people. Not really, actually. But he's a very, very famous and prominent figure in Christian history. And the Reformed Presbytery, which is formed by the Covenanters, which we talked about last week, who refused to accept the authority of the state over the church. So the ARP was formed by these two churches or presbytery joining together, and they have formed what is the ARP today. In 1822, the Synod of the South, this is in America now, separated from the Northern ARP, and eventually the Southern Synod became independent ARP Church, which continues today. The Northern ARP merged with the UPCNA, which merged with the PCUSA. And so, started in Scotland, came to the U.S., split North and South. North eventually became what is now known as the PCUSA by merging with different denominations, and the South is what we know as the ARP today.
Yeah, they're really, what do you call it? Focused on in the Carolinas, right? A lot of the
Carolinas,
churches.
yep, in the South, Georgia. That's Derek Thomas's church, and Sinclair Ferguson's church was ARP.
Yeah. So a lot of ARP churches are in the Carolinas, that area.
That's all I have for ARP here.
That's good.
Then moving on to the PCA. This is the Presbyterian Church in America, not to be confused with PCUSA. December 1973, it was first known as the National Presbyterian Church, but changed its name in 1974 to the PCA. It's separated from the Presbyterian Church in the United States in opposition to long-developing theological liberalism, which denied the deity of Christ and the inerrancy and authority of the Scriptures. Okay, moving on to the OPC. This was a denomination that separated from the PCUSA in 1936. Some of these names you'll remember: Cornelius Van Til, Ned Stonehouse, Edward Joseph Young.
Machen.
Yes. So Machen, the beginning of Westminster Seminary, he's the one that started the OPC.
Yep.
Actually, and it was birthed out of a liberal trend that Princeton Seminary and others in the mainline denominations were headed towards. And so Machen, with his fellow professors from Princeton, came out, started Westminster Seminary, and also started the OPC denomination. Their polity, like mentioned before, is the local church, regional presbytery, general assembly. They have no synod, and they have over 300 churches and over 30,000 members. And these are all three of them are part of the NAPAR coalition of denominations. Doctrinal distinctives. They're Presbyterian, Calvinist, and they hold on to covenant theology. And it's interesting, right? Because this denomination is very careful. They're cautious about using instruments in worship. And I think it gives them like a vibe of, oh, you guys must only sing psalms or something like that. But it's not true. Chunsook and I both preached at an OPC congregation, and it was a wonderful time of worship. And we were able to enjoy the fellowship of the saints. And so it's not too different from what we are used to. They didn't use instruments, but that is just, I guess, their culture, and they're trying to be cautious with that. I would say that the OPC is perhaps the most selective with cooperation with other denominations, other churches. Typically, they only stick to the NAPARC denominations. But
yeah, they're still part of NAPARC, but can you tell us what NAPARC is?
It's the North American Presbyterian Assembly of Reformed Churches. It is North American Presbyterian Reformed Council. It's an association of Presbyterian Reformed churches in the U.S. and Canada. And to be a part of this council, you have to adhere to Reformed theology and Presbyterian polity. So it's like a group of churches that gather together.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, some other things to note is if you're part of the Presbyterian denomination, most likely something that Junzuk just mentioned is that it's singular. So when you say PCA, it's Presbyterian Church in America. In the ARP, it's the Associated Reformed Presbyterian Associate Reformed Presbyterian Church. And the OPC is the Orthodox Presbyterian Church.
Yep.
So although there are a lot of local bodies, it's still one church. So because of that, that should shape your ecclesiology then. Or that should, give you an understanding of their ecclesiology. It's just one church with a lot of local bodies. It's different from independency, where each local church, has its own sovereignty and autonomy.
So any thoughts on these different denominations, Pastor G?
Overall,
we're mentioning these three because these are the three that
they're
are
great. I think one of the things that you didn't mention that I could probably add on is the word confessional. And so we want to also be a confessional church, and these churches are confessional churches.
Yeah.
And I get it. ARP is probably the oldest when you think about it, although they did combine with two, right, Covenanters and the Cedars, but they're all in Scotland. And then they came over to the States, like you said. Also, the PCA, even though it was started in 1973, I believe they would think that they have roots still in the PCUS, which is the Southern, Presbyterian Church. So they all have these beginnings for their denomination, but the roots go back further than that. And so what is it ultimately that they should be known for? Probably is their confessionalism. And so what's confessionalism?
They adhere to specific confessions and creeds.
Yeah.
The Reformed confessions and creeds.
The Reformed confessions and creeds is something that will show you that is above, let's say, just using the word reform. So I get it that we could say we're a Reformed church, but so does PCUSA churches. They say they're Reformed.
Anyone can say they're Reformed.
Anybody can say it, but what makes them, what defines our Reformedness? And that is if you're a confessional church. And so what confessions do we adhere to, or what confessions do these churches adhere to? And that's mainly the Westminster Confession of Faith, along with its catechisms. And so those are the things that you would adhere to. I guess there's other confessions like the Confession of 1967, and there's other things that you could put in there. But that's the main one. The main one is the WCF. And that's what we go over even when we do the catechisms in our church. If you want to go to a truly, what we believe to be a Reformed church, it needs to be a confessional church. And then when you look up, let's say you're looking up a church and it's like, oh, is this a good church or not? Look to see if they're a confessional church and which confessions they adhere to doctrinally. And for us, it is the Westminster Confession of Faith. And so I think that's an important point. All three do hold to it. I would say the one that holds to it the most strictly and narrowly is the OPC. And so if you wanted to be an OPC minister, you would have to pretty much adhere to everything. And there's very few exceptions that they will allow ministers to have. And so the OPC, you need to strictly follow that confession, especially the WCF. And so even we were talking about the Sabbatarian laws and things like that, and OPC would follow it way more strictly. The PCA is a little bit broader, and I believe they use the word good faith. As long as you adhere to it in good faith, you could be a minister in the PCA. So you can't have too many exceptions. So I went to a Presbyterian meeting where they would, do a floor exam for a potential minister in the PCA, and they asked this, candidate, do you take any exception with the confessions? And he did. It was one on the Sabbath. And so they would allow that. They would allow some exceptions from the confessions. And that's what we kind of talked about in our staff. Would you take any exceptions to the Westminster Confession of Faith if you were to be a minister in, one of the Presbyterian denominations. And so, there's a little bit broader, there's a bigger umbrella that the PCA holds to. And then that can be shown, like you said, in its worship settings. So they'll use more like modern music instruments that will depict more like the modern culture or contemporary culture. The OPC probably, for the most part, would refrain from that kind of stuff, and they will go back to, I think they just mainly use the Trinity hymnal, right? Do they just strictly use the Psalter?
No, they use the hymnal.
The hymnal, right? So they use the Trinity hymnal. I do believe that some have a Psalter that they used, and the ARP is the denomination I am least familiar with, but you were probably closer because you almost became a minister with the ARP. But as far as I know, ARP is pretty close to the PCA, just in a smaller kind of setting. So they're a smaller group of churches, more spread out, but they function more like the PCA than the OPC.
So I guess a question that a lot of people may have listening to this is understanding that we are non-denominational. What are some of the things that we are looking for? And I remember a couple of years back when you first brought up this topic of our church joining a denomination, you brought up the fact that it has to be Reformed, confessional, complementarian, and you brought up all these different things. But all these churches are that, or rather all these denominations that we discussed today are that. And so even as we look at Reformed, confessional, complementarian denominations, what are some of the things that you are looking for, our session is looking for? What are some of the things that we are considering as we prepare to join a denomination?
Yeah, I think being part of the denomination just makes us confessional. You have to be part of a larger body. We can't be accountable to ourselves. And so being part of a larger body will help us in the long run just to understand that, we're not alone. I think one of the challenges that I thought our church faced, and by the grace of God, this is what happened to us. When we decided to become Reformed and more confessional in our beliefs, there was a lot of pushback. And, some people didn't like that. Churches in the other, in the area, there's a stigma to it, with the things that are going on. And so just to have a partnership with other believers so that we could stand alongside with and they could stand alongside with us, I thought was important. And so there are some churches like that are similar to ours in our beliefs and our faith. And so hopefully we could find a denomination that will be exactly that. The difficult part, of course, is, if we are to join a denomination, then, will the examination be okay for, let's say, myself or the other people that are going to be pastors? And so how long will that take? And then the process of joining that denomination, may be really quick after that. So I think it's really a matter of myself, to be honest, if I'm thinking about it. And if I join a denomination, then I'll probably have to take some time off to take the exams and study for that. It's not easier being an older person to do that, I would imagine. I mean, I haven't even tried.
So it's more of like a practical thing.
Yeah, it's more pragmatic in that sense. But, it's because we didn't start off in a denomination. We started off non-denom. That's a little bit more difficult. But as far as I'm concerned, the OPC, PCA, ARP, great denominations, I think we'd probably be more in line with the PCA if I had to nitpick. But I wouldn't necessarily have problems with the OPC or the ARP. The OPC might be a little bit more restrictive in worship expressions, but the OPC also believes in more narrowly their definition of the regulative principle. So if it's not allowed for in the Bible, they won't do it at all. And so there are some things that they have, traditionally interpreted that as, and they have followed along. And so that's the OPC. I don't necessarily see anything wrong with that. I mean, I love congregational singing, and I do think that the instruments can be a hindrance at times. And so, if the instruments are louder than the voices, or if that main vocal is more like a rock concert, I have issues with that. And so I don't like that. I don't like it if people go back and be like, oh, worship was so good because that lead singer was just amazing. I was like, what? What is going on here? So we didn't go there for a concert. We don't care about necessarily the lead singer blowing us away with his or her voice. We care about if the congregation is faithfully singing the hymns and psalms to each other, just as Paul would say in Hebrews chapter. Oh, I'm sorry. I should say the Hebrews author would say in Hebrews 10.
The Hebrews author.
Yeah, Hebrews author,
Also known as Paul.
AKA Paul.
Yeah. People might have issue with that, like Shinzak.
Chinzuk doesn't think it's Paul. Actually, Brian would probably have the biggest issue with that. He's the actually guy in our staff. Actually.
A smart guy, sharp guy, like a tack, if you will. Very bright.
Brass.
So, as we continue to pray for our pastors, our session, these are just some of the denominations that we wanted to keep in mind. These are the three that we have been looking at and kind of conversing with. And so just wanted to let our listeners and our church members know as well that, these are this is the direction that we are heading.
Yeah. I don't want the PCA to fail.
What do you mean to fail? Like
PCA is the biggest denomination. They're going through a bunch of stuff these days. And so, some people have suggested outside our church, some people have suggested if we join the PCA, we could help them. I don't think we could save them in any way. Obviously, I don't think at that level. But to join in just to fight is kind of interesting. But I do want the PCA to thrive and succeed. And now they're going through a bunch of stuff. They're trying to redefine what it means to be racially just versus also like what Christian nationalism is. That's going on right now in the GA. So they have their I think the GA is, as we're recording, is still going on, right? It just ended today. And so those are things that I hope that they will come out on the right side of.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Pastor Eugene. I'll move on to current events. For today's current event, we have two. First, we want to talk about Iran and Israel, and then the mayor, I guess, the Democratic candidate for the mayor position of New York City. First, in terms of our topic of Iran and Israel, last week the biggest news all over the world was World War III ? And to give us a small recap, on June 13th, Israel launched airstrikes on Iranian military nuclear sites and key nuclear scientists. I believe that this was on the 60th day. I believe that there was a 60-day window in which Iran could agree to de-escalate their nuclear program. They had decided not to do that. So I believe, please correct me if I'm wrong, on the 60th day, 61st day, Israel launched airstrikes on these nuclear sites and key nuclear scientists. Iran then retaliated with ballistic missiles against Israeli cities. I believe they shot at Tel Aviv and other cities. And then from that point on, it was a back and forth. On June 22nd, 9 days after the first strike, the U.S. entered with bunker busters on nuclear facilities at Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan. And I believe that Israel needed the U.S. to come in because these were, at least Fordow was a base that was under, I think, a mountain.
Yeah.
And I believe the U.S. is the only country that has the technology to be able to fight in that kind of context. After this, the Iranian forces also struck the U.S. airbase in Qatar, which, we all know wasn't really a military strike. It was more of a symbolic attack so that the Iranians wouldn't lose face. There's an aspect of, in war, if you get hit, you have to strike back or you seem weak. And so they hit the U.S. airbase in Qatar, but they told the U.S. that they were going to strike prior to doing it. And so no U.S. service members were affected, nor was there much damage done. President Trump even thanked Iran for, quote unquote, giving us early notice and said that they, quote unquote, had gotten it all out of their system. Then, in the midst of much criticism of striking Iran, President Trump brokered a ceasefire on June 24th between the two nations. And I believe they had a 12-hour deadline. Before the deadline was over, however, Iran accused Israel of firing a last round of missiles, and then Iran retaliated. The fighting was happening until the very last moment when the ceasefire would take place. Actually, as a matter of fact, there was a rocket that was fired after the time limit, and then Israel sent out their fighter jets, but then Trump urged Netanyahu to turn back the jets, which they did. And so this has been a very, I guess, volatile situation, and there's been a lot of talk going around regarding this conflict. Even from our side, from the U.S. side, questions of why are we joining this war? It's so expensive, just the economic cost of it. And then now we have conflicting reports of asking, did we really get all the enriched uranium? Did we really get rid of it? Or did we not? Because apparently there is a report that we did not. Some believe that they missed them because 2 trucks, I think, were seen leaving one uranium site. So like, oh, what if there were uranium in there? And so people are questioning the economic cost of it. They're questioning the effectiveness of the strike. And when President Trump said that the nuclear program of Iran was obliterated, was it really? Or are we just following Netanyahu too much? Because he has been talking about how far along Iran was in their nuclear program for years now. And so aren't we just getting played along? And so these are some of the thoughts that a lot of people have, and we'll see this in the media as well. People kind of bringing up these reports and thoughts. And so I guess the question is, as a Christian, is there a specific good and bad or right and wrong side in this conflict? And it seems that there, again, is a lot of differing opinions. Do Christians support global policing? Do Christians support the bombing of Iran? It almost feels like Christians are pushed to support Israel simply because the opponent is Muslim. And so, when we think about it like that, I remember there was a interview with Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz that a friend sent to me, and he quoted a Bible passage that he didn't even know. He said, Tucker Carlson pretty much asked, why do we support Israel? Why do you support Israel? And he said, well, growing up, I went to church, Sunday school, and we learned that in the Bible, God says that God will bless those who bless Israel, and God will curse those who curse Israel, which is a very dispensational way of looking at things. And that's from Genesis 12:3. It reads, I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And this is God's covenant to Abraham. And then Tucker Carlson then asked, okay, what do you mean by Israel? When you're looking at this text in the Bible, what Israel is it talking about? Is it talking about the geopolitical borders that we see now? Is it the government of Israel? What Israel are you talking about? And they had a back and forth with this, and Ted Cruz couldn't answer. And so, with all of this kind of going around, Christians may be confused. Do we support this? Do we not? Is there a good and evil here, or are we just kind of getting pushed around by Israel and their government?
Yeah, there was a lot there.
That's a lot.
Let me try to go from the beginning. Knowing history is always good. Just following commentators, not so good. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll start off with this because I know even within our church, there's a whole spectrum of people or a spectrum of beliefs that people hold to. I believe that foreign policy may be one of the most difficult things to fully get right. That being said, I am probably the most quiet when it comes to foreign policy because I believe it's very difficult to know exactly what the right answer is. Very difficult. There was a president, I believe his name is Warren Harding, who was a president right after World War I, and he was famous because his kind of tagline was "Return to normalcy," and it's something that presidents try to use. Biden tried to use it again too after COVID. He said "return to normal" because I guess normalcy was too archaic of verbiage to use, but he wanted to do something called "Return to Normalcy." And he had a more of an isolationist stance when it came to foreign policy and global affairs. You don't know who Warren Harding is because he was a terrible president. So his isolationist policy, people saw largely as a failure. But there are isolationists out there, commentators that are very isolationist. I think off the top of my head, because most people probably listen to more on the conservative leaning side of commentators. I don't think you guys listen to like left wing commentators, but it would be like Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens, more isolationist. Okay.
Yep.
And then on the other side are what we would call the interventionists or neocons. Neo meaning new, con meaning conservative. So the newer conservative movement, people are more of the interventionists. Oh, I would say like Rand Paul and Thomas Massey, the senators, they're more isolationist too. You know, worry about America, stop putting our boys in danger or sending our soldiers overseas. So they're more isolationist. And I think a lot of people adopt that isolationist view. There are, of course, the neocons. You know, I think Lindsey Graham is one, and he's pretty much hated by a lot of the conservatives. But he's more interventionist. He wants to get in there, and people would accuse him of, you know, trying to facilitate regime change and things like that. And so if you look at the two seemingly opposing sides in foreign policy, it would be, are you an isolation? Is the Christian stance isolationism or is it interventionism? And I would say that for me, I don't think the Christian could subscribe fully to one absolutely. It does affect us, and if it affects us, then we must intervene. And going back to, you know, history, you could go to the Barbary Wars. You know what they are, right? The Barbary Wars in Tripoli and things like that. And so what the Muslim nations were doing in that area, where they were taking, and with their corsairs and their pirate ships, they were taking ships from, let's say, the Europeans, but also the United States of America. And then they were enslaving these people. So they enslaved, and this is like 1 year after, you know, we were the U.S. and things like that. It was just a few years after, if my memory serves me correct. It was like in the 1800s, the early, like 1801. Like that's the first Barbary War. But so it's like right after we became the United States of America, we're in this war. But then this is what happened. We would send our emissaries, like John Adams, who's the other guy? Thomas Jefferson.
TJ.
Yeah. They would go to London, get the ambassador to these Muslim countries in London, and then say, dude, why are you enslaving our people? We don't want to get involved in your wars and your struggles. And this is what the ambassador in London directly told Jefferson and John Adams. Is like, you know, in our book, the Quran, you guys are infidels and we can enslave you. And they enslaved tons of people. And so, you know, Jefferson said, you know, if you do this, we're going to send our Navy and we're going to destroy you. We're going to, you know, demolish you. And that's exactly what Jefferson did. He sent in the Navy and demolished these guys. And so if you look at history, U.S. doesn't necessarily want to go into war. So they would maybe have a preemptively isolationist policy historically. But then when they would impede on our, let's say, trade routes, or, you know, even take people from these ships and capture them and enslave them, the U.S. is like, well, we have to intervene now. We have to like do something about this now. Even if it be we go to war with, you know, with the Muslim nations. And so that's exactly what happened. And, you know, long story short, the U.S. demolished them. And so if you're saying, should we be isolationist? Should we be interventionist? For me, it's a more difficult position for me to absolutely take. And I get it that people that are listening, if I'm getting this right, in our church, they're probably more absolute isolationists, I think, more than anything. I don't know any interventionists really in our church, but absolute isolationists is a little bit of a tougher position for me to really hold on to. And then I get it, like, you're going to send our boys into war to die? You're going to send your son to war to die? It's like, no one wants that. I don't want that. And so what is the other thing? That we never go to war, that we never, threaten them with a big stick and say, if you do this, we're going to smack you around. We're never going to do that. And so I think that's something that we need to think about. Secondly, I think the Christian position to hold when it comes to especially foreign policy is more of a, dare I say, humble position. And it's more of a, I'm not exactly sure what this will turn out, but let me pray. Honestly, and I know it sounds almost trite and cliche, but I think when President Trump launched those bombs, the bunker buster bombs, into like Fordo and all those other underground nuclear facilities, because they needed those 30,000 pound bombs to go in to effectively, dismantle their nuclear program within those sites. I thought the more proper response would be prayer and more like silent reflection, not like immediate anger or like, oh, he's bringing us into World War III. So if you said that and he didn't bring us into World War III right now, like we're not in World War III right now, as we're speaking. No. I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. Are you going to apologize? Are you going to say, I was wrong? And are you going to say, I take that back? Or are you going to double down? Because that's what Tucker Carlson, well, not Tucker Carlson, that's what Candace Owens really is doing, doubling down. She said, I saw a clip of her saying, like, if you're enlisted, then you should get a dishonorable discharge and get yourself out of there. And I thought that was like maybe the worst thing that you could possibly say. That is not only fear mongering, it's actually promoting illegal activity that harms the country. And so you can't say stuff like that. You can't be like, if you're enlisted right now, get out because, Trump is going to send you into World War III. I do not think that's the case. Again, could be wrong. I always hold foreign policy stuff with a more of an open palm than a tight grip on these issues. But if you're really upset about, let's say, him dropping stuff, I think you are probably in the minority. There's a CBS poll that just came out a few days ago where if you're a Republican, if you approved of the bombings, and Republicans on the approval of the bombings is upwards of 80%. That's what I believe. Brian, I'm going to look for this right now so I'm not just talking out of my butt. And I'll probably send this to you just so that you have it on record. Is that okay? So the CBS poll is pretty telling, because if you look at the MAGA Republicans, not just Republicans, if you look at the MAGA Republicans, I believe it's like 90%. That's how crazy it is. And so there it is. Okay, I'll send this to you, Brian. And it's reported from the CBS polling. Republicans approve 85%, disapprove 15%. That's a 70-point difference. MAGA Republicans approve 94%, disapprove 6%. That's an 88-point difference. And so if you are a Republican and then you disapprove, just know that you are in a very small minority. And you have to also ask why. Is it because you know better than every Republican out there when you stand against your party? And of course, people are going to be like, well, I'm not just simply a party loyalist. Yeah, of course. Of course. That's not what we're saying. But I don't think Republicans are simply party loyalists either, all of them. And so I saw another poll that was done. Do you want to go to war with Iran? And people, this was done by interactive poll that was done by Michael Knowles, I believe.
I love that
on
guy.
X. But yeah, 20% said yes, 80% said no. Okay, no one wants to go to war with Iran. And then the next question was, should Iran hold nuclear weapons? And then 80% said no, 20% said yes. And so that's a tough position to hold. If you're trying to come up with foreign policy And like, we don't want to go to war with Iran, but at the same time, I firmly believe that Iran shouldn't hold nuclear weapons. Then you're in a tough position. It's a very, very difficult maneuver to make. The fact that our current president was able to drop bombs, and right now, as far as we're talking, there is a ceasefire between the two countries. That was facilitated by Trump, by the president, and so there is no war. There's no war. There's no more attacks. It's done as far as we know, and then we'll see how far we could go from there. Again, I'm not very optimistic about everything, especially when it concerns the Middle East. But it doesn't mean that it's all going to go to hell like tomorrow either.
Can I go back to something that you said? It's this idea that Iran should not hold nuclear weapons. There was a view that I saw where people were saying, well, Iran holding nuclear weapons is a form of self-defense for them. Why are we limiting a country to defend themselves? Aren't we just kind of global tyrants at that point, where when we pick and choose, hey, you're our ally, you can have nukes. You're not our ally, we don't really like you, you can't have nukes. Isn't that wrong?
Yeah. I think that's like the stance of like Candace Owens and people like that. I think that is a very naive view, to be honest. You have a unstable country. You have leaders that have terrorist tentacles around the globe, because that Iran has sleeper cells, and that's what people are afraid of, right? When Trump dropped those bombs, people are like, "Oh, those sleeper cells," and they're very scared. And then people gave alerts out there. People are legitimately scared. So you're scared of Iran because they want the destruction of the U.S. They are a very volatile nation. Their leadership is being held on by a thread. The Ayatollah is not liked by the people in Iran, but they hold that iron fist over all their people. They want the nuclear weapon because not only do they want legitimacy in, let's say, the world fearing them, they're absolutely going to use that weapon and for the destruction of their enemies. There's no doubt about that. So if you are the U.S. and you hear Iran chant in their meetings, in their state meetings, death to America, death to Israel, and they call the U.S. the great Satan and Israel the little Satan. And then you have these CNN anchors go out there and be like, "Oh, I was there. It's just like a chant they do. They don't really mean harm."
It's just a chant they do.
And so when you hear
fun.
stuff like that from media, they're so disingenuous and it's almost deplorable. I don't say almost. Let me take the word almost out. It's just deplorable. It's disgusting. Yeah, it's disgusting. And so when you have a country that does that and they want your demise, when they're the people that went out into the streets cheering when 9/11 happened, right? Is that something that you want to say, you know what? I don't care. I'm an isolationist. Let them do what they want. When they want to actively destroy your country, and they have done things to do that. They have, not just funded, but they've trained, they facilitated, and they've commissioned all these attacks on the U.S., on U.S. soil, let alone, it's our other satellites out there. And you're like, yeah, why can't we just give them the nuclear weapon? Because, North Korea has one and they didn't blow up anything yet. Dude, North Korea is such a different animal from Iran. North Korea is just a pile of dirt. They don't have anything. They just have the nuclear weapon. If they launch one, they're done. They're done. We're going in there and that country's just blown to smithereens. They know that. And so they're a different animal. The fact that you could compare them with North Korea just shows you how little that you know of foreign policy at all. So you're a smart person, then data is extremely important. If Iran really is okay, if they had nuclear weapons, who could have gave it to them? Russia, China, North Korea, their so-called allies. They could have given them one. They didn't. Why? Why is that the case? They could have given that to them yesterday, but they didn't. you have to also understand that maybe you don't know enough about foreign policy to warrant such confident opinions and reactions to it. So whenever someone has a really confident opinion about Iran, it always takes me back, like, how can you be so confident? You're not even from Iran. People from Iran aren't that confident either. And so people from Iran have a very, very moderate position. You and I know, someone who is of Iranian descent, right? And he was born here, but his parents were refugees. But at the same time, when I talk to him, he has a very moderate position when it comes to foreign policy.
Yeah.
He doesn't have an extremist position. And so when you even talk to people that are from Iran, they're moderate. Why do you have such an extreme position? So that is what kind of gets me when people have such a strong, confident stance on something as complex as this issue in Iran. And that is something that I would think that as a Christian, you should maybe take a step back from. Stop listening to people with, these extreme isolationist view or the extreme interventionist view. Maybe understand that we don't want to intervene, but if we have to, we will. And where's the line? That line is decided by the leader of the country, Congress, not you. You could have an opinion. You don't want to die in a war. Absolutely. I don't think anybody does. And so, one thing that you can do, like I said, is you could pray for the leader of our nation, pray for President Trump, and then maybe, I don't know, do more reading. Stop listening to simply. Okay, so I want to go to this point before we pass by it. I don't like it that too many conservatives only listen to pundits and they don't read. I have an issue with that. So if you're getting your news only from watching or listening to podcasts, I have an issue. I don't think you should. I don't think you know anything about global affairs. I don't think you know anything about foreign policy just because you listen to, let's say, Tucker Carlson or Ben Shapiro or something like that. I don't think you know all there is to know about foreign policy. And I get it that you could hate somebody. I think there is some hate recently toward Ben Shapiro because people think he's Israel first.
Yeah.
I'm more sympathetic toward Mr. Shapiro only because I really hope that he becomes a Christian too. But let's say you, Sam, you're an American citizen. Oh, you weren't born here though.
No, but I'm still a USA citizen.
Just like you were born here?
I can't be like president.
You were born here?
Brian
was born here.
Yeah.
Brian's born here. He's a U.S. citizen. And something happens to, let's say, China. And then he's like, yeah, I hope nothing bad happens to China. It's like, he's a China first guy. It's like, how is that the case? So if you came to me, I was born here. I was naturalized. I was born here, grew up here, raised here, went to school here. All I know is the United States. But something happened to South Korea. Wouldn't I want something good for South Korea? I'm not connected to South Korea at all just because I'm a U.S. citizen. So if I say, I hope South Korea does the right thing here, and I have a little bit more affection toward the country of South Korea, does that make me a South Korea first guy?
But I think the accusation is people think that Ben Shapiro's takes are way too pro-Israel with no concern for the other side.
Yeah, so that's what I disagree with. You have to be able to show me something. So this is what I want to get at. Because people are saying that. Who says that? People like Tucker Carlson or, Candace Owens will say something like that. Or I don't know if you're on X and like the Hodge twins and people like that will say that. So don't get me wrong. I've seen that view and I consider the view. I just think that from my perspective, from what I've seen and what I've read, that is absolutely not the case. And I get it that, trying to protect Israel because all your people have all conglomerated. They're all now just mashed into this one tiny piece of land that's this, the size of New Jersey, right? It's mashed in this tiny piece of land, and you don't want that piece of land to be blown up by a nuclear bomb. If that makes you Israel first, I get why that some people might be like, I don't care at all about Israel, but as a Jew, you probably would. And so some people just hate Jews. So it's again, this is complex. Some people just hate Jews, and if you hate Jews because you think they're controlling, like Netanyahu's controlling Trump, then I think you're an imbecile. And so I think that's a very, very not only naive take, it's a very dangerous take to think that Netanyahu controls Trump like a puppet. There's no so I probably offended a few people. So let me tell you something about the Gelman theory. So there's something called the Gelman amnesia effect. Michael Crichton made it famous in his 2002 speech, but Michael Crichton's the guy who wrote like The Sphere, The Congo, most famously Jurassic Park.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so he wrote all those books. I was a huge Michael Crichton fan back in the day, so I read all those books. And I was the kind of guy who, once you read the book, I would refuse to watch the movie. So I didn't watch Jurassic Park until like 20 years later after it was released. But the movie wasn't bad. But the book was amazing. And so he kind of made it popular in 2002 with his speech. But the Gelman amnesia effect is this. When you read the paper, like let's say the three of you says you guys are with me and you're reading a paper, and then this journalist decides to do a paper on church ecclesiology or some kind of theological topic. When you read it, what naturally happens when any journalist writes about, let's say, anything theological, and he's like, this is the Presbyterian view, you're going to read that and you can be like, that's wrong, that's stupid, that's a terrible take, that's wrong, this is so surface, this is so shallow. This is worse than a layman's perspective, right? That's what you normally do. So that's the Gelman amnesia effect is, but then you turn the page and you go to a topic that you don't know, for instance, foreign policy, and then you'll read a journalist write on foreign policy. The Gelman amnesia effect is, that's right, okay, that's pretty cool. You take all of that in. You subscribe to everything that the journalist said, right? So I get it that you don't like Ben Shapiro or Tucker Carlson. You don't like one of them. I don't care if you like them or dislike them. I think some people have been wrong consistently. Let's say like a CNN analyst, they've been wrong consistently because they're just a propaganda outlet. I get that. New York Times is just mainly like, now it's the upwards of 90% just propaganda writing. Like on Father's Day, they decided to put out an op-ed about how my father wasn't good. So New York Times is just, a heaping pile of garbage. I get a lot of people listening to this will also think that. But the Gelman amnesia effect is real, where you will listen to a topic from someone that you are not familiar with, that you are not an expert in, and then you'll take that wholesale. You'll just believe it all. So like, Trump is going to lead us to World War III, and this is my expert opinion because of this. This journalist will say that. This journalist is not an expert on world affairs or foreign policy. A journalist is just a journalist, and then you'll take it wholesale. I have an issue with that because that will keep you in your naivete. That will keep you in your lack of knowledge in this field. It'll keep you dumb, is my point. So what is the solution to the Gelman amnesia effect? If you are aware of the Gelman amnesia effect, then you will, number one, read history, read books, and number two is you always cross-check facts and references. You always cross-check. So if you listen to something and you never go, let's say, whoever, I don't care who the analyst is, you listen to this pundit or analyst, and they say something, and you never go, let me double check that.
Yeah.
If you never say that and you take everything wholesale, there's an issue with you because that person is just taking you on for this narrative ride. And then eventually you'll start thinking like, oh, the Jews control everything. The Jews are the really evil ones and they're all located in Israel, so Israel should go down. And you're like, what? That's crazy. And I'm saying this because I literally have people coming to me telling me that they believe, and these are Christians, mind you, telling me that they believe that all the ills of the world are because of Jews. That's a really tough take, my friend. Look, I get it that if you've read, and Martin Luther had an issue with Judaism. It's different from having an issue with Jews, and sometimes he blurred that line in one of his writings. I get that some of you even go back to Martin Luther and things like that, but you haven't read his work. You heard someone else talk about Martin Luther on his idea of Jews and things like that. Like, he desperately wanted the Jews to be saved. He hated Judaism. He hated those that were following, the rabbinical teachings post-Christ. He hated that. And I get it that he was frustrated with the Jews, but just to say that he was like, he hated the Jews, so we should also hate the Jews. It's like, that's a crazy take, but that's what people are telling me. And so people that don't read, that don't cross-check facts, that just listen to a pundit, that just listen to one narrative, that's an issue with me. And so there's so many conspiracies that people hold on to. And I go, you don't have proof. They're like, no, there's proof. There's proof out there. And I've seen the documentary. First of all, a documentary is the lowest form of any kind of journalism. You should never watch a documentary. This is why people went into veganism. Oh. This is like the worst thing. I won't even get into it. A documentary is a one-sided presentation of so-called facts, but they're not facts because you never cross-check them. So things like, I heard things like, the owner of the World Trade Center, he just got an insurance policy. And so when the planes hit and the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers fell, he was able to cash in on billions of dollars from insurance money. Fact check. It's true. It's true. So did he know? So these conspiracy theorists would be like, he knew. He knew. Except when you continue to cross-check these facts, the dude had to sign another 99. His lease was up. He signed another 99-year lease just months prior, and he had to take out an insurance policy for that. And because, terrorism and things like that were rare, there was a big sum attached to that. And then people are going to be like, well, what a happy coincidence. Yeah, there's a lot of happy coincidences out there. So you just believe that? Unless you present to me evidence to the contrary, yes, you take it. The simplest is Occam's razor. The simplest outcome is most likely the right one, right? And so you don't present evidence to the contrary. You just have this always skeptical view, like the Illuminati or some kind of shadow government or some shadow institution is making all the decisions for us. For instance, so I have a problem with that because that makes you dumb. You will never cross-check you will never cross-check any facts. You'll always believe whatever. Now, this very simple, I'm going to call it the Uber clause. The Uber clause is everything fits into this one narrative. There is the shadow government controlling everything. So as long as it goes into the shadow government controlling everything, then you believe that. Same thing. The Uber cause is the Jews control everything. So everything must fit into this. It's not like maybe the Jews control some are really evil. Absolutely, I believe some are really evil, and they happen to be Jewish. Maybe because of their belief in some of their beliefs in Judaism. I get that too. But not all Jews are evil. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like the Nobel Physics, like all these like great prizes, I guess most of them were Jews. But this Uber cause, I get it from Ubermensch, it's just a term I'm making up. It's from Ubermensch, from Nietzsche, is Nietzschean. So in effect, if you believe in that, you become Nietzsche. We're the ones that blame the left for having this Uber cause. This Uber cause is anything that is going to destroy colonialism, and then they believe in this Marxist way, they're going to do that. And so as long as it destroys the country, they always go for this cause. And that's the Uber cause. It's very Nietzschean. It's deconstructionist Marxist, right? And they always go for that. And we point our fingers to people that believe that, and yet we're the ones succumbing to this also Uber cause that everything's part of the shadow government. Everything's part of the Jews. It's not. I hate to break it to you. There is a power in the world. There is a principality in the world, and it's not some shadow government. It's the devil. And that's something that we need to be aware of. There are demonic forces out there, and we have to believe that Christ has won it all. Because in the end, what I found is people who believe in these conspiracies have no hope in life. They don't believe that this world could ever turn better. Then they don't really evangelize. You don't have this hope in Christ, a brightness and joy that Christ would give you, but you always have this pessimistic view on the world, in life in general. So Jesus isn't the king. It's the shadow government. I have an issue with that because it affects you theologically. So there are two things that are proposed here. It's the Gelman amnesia effect. And secondly, it's a term that I made up, but it's the Uber cause. It makes you Nietzschean and Marxist if you're on the left, but it keeps you in this Nietzschean view of nothing really matters. And I do have a problem with that as a Christian. I don't believe you could subscribe to the Uber cause in any effect.
And that's helpful because a lot of people, like you said, are kind of being not cornered, but kind of led to this meta narrative, if you will, that everything is the fault of the Jews. And so I think that's helpful for us to hear.
We should pray for their salvation, just like we should pray for Muslim salvation. But then if they have an ideology that is anti-Christian, we should also not be afraid to point it out. And I'm not saying we should just, be like lovey-dovey to everyone. I hope everyone becomes a Christian. We stand up for what is truth and we'll call out what is false. Absolutely. Absolutely. But it's also in the hopes that these people will see the truth. And if not, they are damning themselves because the truth is right in front of them. And yet they're the ones rejecting the truth. So as Christians, we should point out the truth. I do not think that the ultimate evil in the world are like people, but people should be proselytized to. They should be evangelized to. But their causes can be evil. Their beliefs can be evil. But when we demonize a person, then you have gone over to the other side, my friend. You can't demonize people. You could demonize their beliefs and their causes, but you hope and pray that they convert to the truth. That's why so many Muslims converted to Christianity, and we celebrate that. There are so many Messianic Jews who converted to Christianity, and we celebrate that. Speaking of the brother that I mentioned before, whose parents were refugees from Iran, I sent him a new link. This article that showed that there are more mosques closing down in Iran today, and a record number of Christians actually growing in Iran. That is amazing news, and we should celebrate that. And I think that's what we should be praying for. I get it that foreign policy is something that you really want to be involved in, that you want to know, and maybe you want to have this heated opinion on. But I think there should be a bigger passion in your life. If it's like even considering the state of Iran, and you pray and hope that Christianity thrives there, that our brothers and sisters will not only survive, but they'll be able to spread the gospel truth to those that are around them. I hope that's the case, instead of you demonizing anybody. In the same vein, I hope that happens in Israel too. When I went to Israel, I visited a church there, and the Messianic Jews were so welcoming to me. The Hasidic Jews hated me. I mean, they hated Christians. But I mean, if you're not hated somewhere, are you really a Christian? That kind of thing pops up. But they were so welcoming, and their service was so Presbyterian. I loved it. And so one thing that was different was they had a children's sermon. So that was a little different. So they had a children's sermon, and then they excused the children, and then the adult sermon.
Wait, some Presbyterian churches do that.
Yeah. So they did that. So that one was something I wasn't aware of.
I think that's a great call for us to pray, and I think it's a good reminder for us as well. Speaking of prayer, the next topic is regarding the question of how do we pray. A Shia Muslim socialist who ran for the Democratic primary for mayor of New York City, won opposing previous mayor, Governor Andrew Cuomo, And the city being as blue as it is, it leaves many to think that now Zoran Memdani is going to be the new mayor for New York. And there are a lot of extreme promises that he's making. He's, for example, said that he will freeze rent for New Yorkers. He'll get rid of bus fares. He'll create city-run grocery stores, and the list of promises goes on. And you could tell his agenda is very socialist. And when I hear about this, it just kind of feels like there's going to be chaos. Yeah. And I think, because we live right next to New York, most of our friends, family, church members work in New York or frequent New York, New York City. He's been named the primary there. So how is a Christian supposed to think and pray about this? Because, again, we might think, well, he's just mayor, right? He just, it's a lowly position in the grand scheme of things compared to president, I guess, right? But he's going to be a leader of a city that a lot of us are connected to. And so how do we think and how do we pray? I think a lot of us are complaining about this, but there has to be a better way.
Yeah, I hope he doesn't become mayor, but in all likelihood, the way it's going, he is on the path and trajectory to become the next mayor of New York City. And politics is a complicated animal. I get it. It depends on who's going to run on the independent ticket, if it's simply going to be
Eric
Adams, or if Cuomo's going to join in and try to take some votes by also running on the independent ticket. And, we also have a Republican candidate there. And so, are they all going to consolidate together to run against Mamdani? It's all kind of, interesting to watch. But as you pray for the city, I think we shouldn't want the demise of a city. You should pray for relief for a city. It's the same thing with Abraham, with Lot. When Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham didn't go, yeah, send that fire down. They deserve to burn. He would say, what if there's like 100 people? What if there's like 50? Won't you save that city? So, I think that's a better heart to have. I hope New York City doesn't get this guy because obviously, this is a very anti-Christian kind of ideology or ideologies that he holds.
So we can continue to pray for good, godly leaders then.
Yeah, what's interesting about the Mamdani thing is the people that voted for him are all white and Asian. Isn't that funny? Here, I'll send you the thing. Brian, could you put this up? So I'll read it off for you. Brian could put it up, but if you look at the Hispanics or the Latinos of any race, they voted for Cuomo. Look at Black or African American, they voted for Cuomo. If you look at all the other races, they voted for Cuomo. The people, the races that voted for Mamdani are white and Asians. And so it's not even like the deep minorities that vote for Mamdani, which is telling, in my opinion. And then, there is the whole, I don't know if I could find it, but if I find it, I could send it to you. But it's just the upper echelons of the economic classes that voted for Mamdani. If you were in the poor classes, you voted for Cuomo. So these people, and I think Daryl Harrison has been really going off on Mamdani in his Twitter or X, which I really appreciated. So he chose one path, and this is the Mamdani. I think we want New York City not to be destroyed. It's an American city. It belongs to Americans. It doesn't just simply belong to New Yorkers. And I was born and raised in New York. So again, like I said about South Korea, I have a great affinity and connection with New York City. I do not want it to fall. I hated that we had people like de Blasio out there who really, really constituted a big denigration of the city right now, not just of its resources, raising its taxes and all the good people leaving and things like that, but just New York City is just a pile of heap now, a dung heap. And so I want them to do better. I want, restaurants and the artistic expressions to thrive in places like New York City. I want good things to happen in New York City. Here it is. Yeah, I'll send that to you, Brian. And so if you look at median income and if you look at the poor people, they voted for Cuomo. What happens is you have all these like people that have been rich because Mamdani also grew up rich. I think his father was a Columbia professor. His mother was an actress. Dude was not poor at all. He's a trust fund kid. He didn't hold a job. He's like 33 or something like that, right? He's this young guy. He hasn't held a real job. He just volunteer works and worked in politics and then became a state assemblyman for like 3 years. And so what's incredible is someone who hasn't worked, that doesn't know work, is vying for people that he will give them free stuff, who doesn't understand economics. It's like, why don't we just freeze the rent? And why don't we just have state-sponsored grocery stores? That'll solve it.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like it did in Russia, because that really worked there. Psych, it didn't. And so someone who doesn't understand any economics, that's really rough. And so those are things that I hope that we could pray through. If you're upset that Mamdani did win it, it just goes to show you what New York City is made up of now, the people that are voting at least. And it shows you that the city's in big trouble.
It's a city that needs our prayers. So I think as you talked about before, as we pray for Iran, as we pray for Israel, it's a good reminder for us to pray for our home, to pray for New York as well.
I really went off on that foreign policy thing, huh?
Maybe in a good way. But
so?
What it's interesting is what happened to the LA riots? Where are they now?
Yeah, I asked you that, right? What happened to the LA riots? And then, so I heard that the FBI launched an investigation on who's funding the LA riots, and then it just disappeared.
Yeah.
It just vanished.
Apparently,
like a fart in the wind.
It doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Well, let's do some history. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. So let me tell you about Julius Caesar, according to Plutarch. You know who he is?
This is the madman.
What? No, that's Nietzsche.
No, you're talking about the madman theory? No, you're going to talk about when he was abducted by pirates?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He acted like a madman.
Yeah.
So Plutarch, I think, wrote this around 180, something like this. But this is Julius Caesar, who was born about 100 BC. But this is about when Caesar was abducted by pirates when he was around 25 years old. And, there were all these Sicilian pirates out there and things like that. And they captured him and they wanted a ransom for him. Mm-hmm. This is a very famous story. And so I hope this kind of helps. They ransomed him and they wanted 20 pieces of silver. Mm-hmm. So Caesar laughed at that. And he said, "What are you talking about? I'm worth at least 50. And so he made those pirates require 50 pieces of silver for his ransom. And so, Plutarch writes about he was captured in their captivity for about 38 days. But during those 38 days, he would recite poems to them. He would act like he was the king. And then when they didn't understand his poem, he would laugh at them. He would call them idiots, that kind of thing. What happened then was, as he was in their captivity, he would also jest. He would joke when I come out of this, I'm going to crucify all of you. And then they would always kind of laugh and things like that because they thought he was just crazy. But they would actually be entertained by Caesar. And then after that, Julius Caesar, after that, his men did come up with 50. And then they paid the pirates the 50 pieces of silver. They ransomed them. They got them back. Julius Caesar immediately manned ships and then went after them and then caught them and then imprisoned them. He went to the governor at the time of that area and then asked that they get crucified. And then when he said, nah, it's too much trouble, Julius Caesar went to that prison and crucified each of those pirates himself. It's a famous story. It's out there. The significance of that is it was a telling moment of Caesar's rise. Okay, it was a telling moment because this is his personality. He took adversity and made it into opportunity. Not only did he recover his ransom, he took all of the pirate spoils and things like that. It showed he had charisma, that he was also ruthless. He had mercy, but yeah, he was uncompromising. He had all these things, the qualities about him. The pirate incident is one of the incidents of Julius Caesar, but the thing that makes me a little bit sad is no one reads historical accounts anymore. No one reads books, and then you might know of some of the things, but you don't know exactly. And it shows you, like, historically what we thought a charismatic leader was. It's someone like Julius Caesar, so to speak. He's like one of them. If you read stories of Alexander the Great, some similar stuff has happened. And I quoted some of the stuff from his, biographies and things like that about changing his name with some guy who ran away. But when you look at someone like a current leader and politician, do they remind you of, let's say, one of the great leaders of the past who is maybe a little, we would see him as unhinged, but charismatic, goes through some of the stuff that's out there? Or do you simply see it in the lens where someone has encapsulated what a leader should be, And that's something that I think about a lot, because who's like the greatest leader for the millennials? Like the greatest president that you guys grew up under. And then, a lot of you guys would say things like Obama was. Well, what made Obama such a charismatic leader? What made him so stand out? And then you could say something political that he did. Or some of the interviews that he did. But if you look at his life, he was just a politician that looked good and talked well on a screen. He didn't do anything. And I get it, that's going to upset some people, especially if you're a big fan of Obama. But he didn't do anything, especially nothing that will last. In fact, he made our country worse when he vied for a gay marriage. And that was actually pretty terrible. And so some of the things that he did was actually pretty terrible. But he looked good in a suit, I guess. He played basketball. He did interviews with these Hollywood celebrities, and people loved him for it. But does that make a good leader? Does that make a good leader? Or is it when they can maybe sound like a madman at times, but they crush their opponents? They absolutely crush their opponents, even if he has to go in and crucify themselves. Does that make a good leader? And those are things like honest questions that people should be able to think and wrap their minds around. I hope that people could think to that capacity. You could disagree. Maybe you think that Julius Caesar was a brutal dictator, and in some ways he might be seen that way. But that's not how history generally sees him. He's a consequential leader, absolutely consequential, whether you agree with him or not. Absolutely consequential. And so what made him consequential? What are the things that he did that lasted throughout history? What's going to make, let's say, your favorite president, Barack Obama, what's going to make him consequential? Because I do believe that he was consequential to a degree, but what about him is consequential in a good way, bad way, evil way, malevolent way, something like that, right? And so those are questions that you should think about if you're going to think politically. Politically, when you think about politics, it's very, very complex. Again, it's a very complex animal. To simplify and reduce it, to dumb it down to just simply one or 2 points is naive. And that's how I want people to look at politics. And so a lot of the things that you would think about when you look at a leader, you should always take a step back and think about it, meditate it, take a second glance. Don't simply take a journalist's word for it. Something like that, or a pundit's word for it. You have to think for yourself. You have to be able to see a bigger picture. You have to, in a sense, be smarter than a journalist, and I hope that you are. Cross-check facts. Think about the Gelman amnesia effect. And if you truly are an expert in an area, you'll know that when a journalist reports on something, he or she doesn't know anything about it, because that's all they are. They're a journalist. They believe that they're bringing things to light, but they're bringing it to light in their own, like you said, ultimate narrative that they want to present, which is a bias. And so when you consider all those things, you might see politics a little differently. And I hope that that's the case. So when you always ask what the Christian view is, the Christian view is always to be humble and to take a step back, to pray for its leaders. Notice how Paul doesn't go any further than that. Even Jesus would say, that fox Herod, but he didn't go any further than that, right? And so even Jesus, who knows everything, that could comment on everything about politics, doesn't involve himself in that. And so I think to understand some of the things about politics is great. For you to have such an absolute stance, I think is dangerous. And so I think we should take a more humble stance when it comes to politics, but we should call out evil for what it is. So if it's abortion, we can clearly call that out as evil. If we see LGBTQ and promoting its, agenda, it's clearly evil. We don't do that. And so those are things that we want to stand on. And if anybody says otherwise, I hope that we can stand against that. But then when we start getting into like foreign policy and things like that, I hope that people could take a step back and take a more nuanced view on it. I don't think that a Christian is necessarily fully isolationist or interventionist. And so I do believe that we should be more nuanced in our take and wise in that sense. I hope that helps with the whole Julius Caesar story that I gave.
Yeah, that's awful. Interesting, scary story. Thank you, Pastor Gene. And we thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. Join us next week. We hope and pray that this has been a blessing in your ears. Fight the good fight, finish the race, keep the faith.
Peace.